Well, hello everybody, welcome back to Sophisticakes. For this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I made these Filigreed Wafer Paper Flowers, and I'm also going to show you how I made this watercolor drip cake. It's pastel-y colors I think are really pretty and a little bit different than what I normally do. And on top of that, I added a layering technique that adds a lot of interest to your cake. So if that sounds interesting, we'll get started with the Filigreed flowers. And for these flowers, we're gonna need, I think this is 22 gauge wire. Doesn't really matter too much, as long as it's thick enough to hold your flower. 22 is fine. And I just added a little loop at the end, and this is what we're gonna build our bud or our base of our flower on. And I just cut a strip of wafer paper and I dampened it with a little bit of wafer paper conditioner and my little pump, and just wrapped it around the loop, and that is what's going to help get everything to stick to it. And to make the rest of this center, I just cut some strips. Obviously, you can see me doing it. It's about 1.5 inches long or wide, and I'm just cutting slits through the entire thing. And we're gonna make 3 flowers. That's why I have the 3 different pieces of paper cut here, and you can see it's kind of frilled, just kind of a frilled edge to that. Then I just added a little bit more wafer paper conditioner, and sometimes you can use it as a glue. Wafer paper glue and wafer paper conditioner are fairly similar. The conditioner adds a little bit of flexibility, where the glue does just that, glues, but it doesn't really necessarily add flexibility. But to wrap this around my center, I needed it to be somewhat flexible. So I just used that to stick it on there. And since wafer paper gets sticky on its own when it gets wet, it worked just fine. And I did all 3 of those, and I set them to the side to dry. I let them dry overnight. With the center like that, it might take a little while for them, a little longer to dry because of the thickness. So overnight's probably a good idea. But now we're gonna go ahead and make our petals. And what I'm just using is some sewing pins, and I just arranged them in a pattern that I'm gonna loop around with these strips of wafer paper. And this is 0 grade wafer paper, and I'm just cutting them into about 1/4 inch thick pieces. Now, it's easier to show this than to explain it, but I'm using that wafer paper conditioner again to glue them. Now just wrap around your center first. And at the outside edges of the petal that you'll see here, I kind of did them on a random pattern. They're not exactly symmetrical. You can if you want, but I wanted it to be more random, so I just kind of staggered them a little bit. Now we're just gonna go from pin to pin and loop it around and attach it towards the bottom, in the bottom there. That's where it's all gonna be anchored together. You can make these as big or as little as you want to. And I did a couple different sizes. And once that is set up, I again let that dry overnight. And you're gonna go ahead, and after that, this probably wouldn't take overnight. You could probably do this within an hour after you do it, but it was late at night when I was making those centers, so the next day I went ahead and finished them. And you just take another strip and you just kind of wrap it around the outside edge. And if you have pieces that are, little loops that are shorter, you can see there, just make sure that that wafer paper is attached to the outside of that loop on those 2. And it gives them a really neat effect to those petals. And I'm gonna go ahead now and crumb coat my cake. I'm just using my crusting American buttercream to do the crumb coat, and a crumb coat is just that. It's a thinner coat of buttercream that locks in the crumbs. I would suggest doing that for all of your cakes, and it just prevents you from having to go back in and pick out little crumbs of the cake that will come through the buttercream if you try to do it all in one go. Make your life easier. Do layers. Do your crumb coat, put it in the refrigerator for 20 minutes or your freezer for 10 minutes. Do another coat, and then you could even do up to 3 coats if you need to. And while that is setting up, I went ahead and I'm using my clothing steamer. You could use a pot of hot water over your stovetop, as long as you're getting a steam. And that just gives some movement to those, the frills on your center. It fluffs it up, really is a good way to say that. And then once those have dried, and that doesn't take long either, since I am piecing together these petals with the center, I didn't want the center to be sticking up way above the petals where they're all joined in the center. So I went ahead and I cut off those little corners. And I'm just using some floral tape. You just stretch it before you use it and it helps it to stick to itself. That's what activates it. And just arrange your petals one at a time. Wrap your tape around it to anchor it to the center and add your next petal and continue that way. You could do these flowers by attaching them at the center without a wire if you wanted to. You just use a flower former and use some wafer paper glue or conditioner and excuse me, let them dry. But I wanted them to be flexible. That way when they're individually wired, you can move them around separately. Now wafer paper is more flexible than a gum paste or a fondant with some Tylose. But you know, it just makes I like it better. I like to be able to move more I want. And I'm showing you here how you can flatten these flowers out if you want to, or I cupped them a little bit. And there's all three of them. Now we're gonna go ahead and do our watercolor. Now you will notice, this is just Everclear with a little bit of gel food coloring. You don't want it to be too concentrated because you can always go back and add more color if you need to. And I'm just testing them out on my paper towel. With some fluffy brushes is what I'm gonna use to paint my buttercream cake. But you won't see me doing my buttercream cake. You'll see here in a second. Here it comes. Ready? There it is. It's not the same cake. I lost the footage. So I just used another cake that I had that was getting ready for the next tutorial, setting up, and I know I can get this color off here with some Everclear. But to show you, and the lighting is horrible. I apologize, I did not have my lighting available when I did this. But anyway, this is the same technique done on the round cake. That is buttercream, this is fondant, but it's exactly the same technique. So just use it on your buttercream if you prefer. Now what you're doing is you're just letting them drip. Just add the buttercream, or I'm sorry, the coloring, and let it drip if you want it to, and just kind of use your sponges to kind of add more interest with layers. You need layering. This cake is all about layering. So just go ahead and just do that until you get it where you want it. But try not to add too much color or work with it too much because it can get kind of muddy. But then I also added some silver leaf, some edible silver leaf with my fluffy brush after. No, I take it back. This hadn't dried. I did it while it was still wet. So that way it would attach to the watercolor. But put it in your refrigerator or your freezer to get it to dry out or dry up before you do the stenciling. This is our third layer of texture and interest. This is kind of a lacy floral stencil, and I'm just using the same buttercream, and I thinned it down a little bit. And then here I'm adding, I thought that the pastel watercolor drip was a little too light, so I went back in and I layered up a little bit more depth. I just wanted it to be a little bit more eye-catching. Plus it photographs better if there's a little bit more depth of color. In person you can see the watercolor a little bit better, but I could tell when I looked in my camera that you couldn't really see it very much. So I just went ahead and went back and added some more. You can add that more later. And now this is what our fourth layer of interest here. I added some dragées, which are just little edible candy beads. And no, they're not silver yet, but I went back in with some silver luster dust that I combined with some Everclear. And I'm just brushing it on to those dragées. That's a good way if you don't have exactly the color you need. Go with a base color, a white or like a gray or a black for your silver, and just touch it up with your edible paint. Now if you needed gold, I would start with a white dragée or like a yellow or a gold. And then you can add it just looks a little better if you have a base tone to your dragées that is similar to the final metallic color that you want. And then just to top it off, I am just adding my Wafer Paper Filigreed Flowers just by sticking the wire that is covered with the floral tape into the buttercream. You could add a straw if you feel better about it, but I wanted them to stick up, and since they're covered with the floral tape, I felt fine with it. That's a personal decision. So there you go, guys. I hope you like it. Hope you give it a go. This is a little different than my normal. And if you would, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share. I'd appreciate it. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch my video. And if you'd like to watch some other videos, go ahead and click on the link to one of these other videos shown here. And if you would like to check out my other social media, I am on Facebook and Instagram under the same name, Sophisticakes by Mary. And please take the time to share, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you know when I upload another video. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you on the next tutorial.